Hi there, everybody. This is uh, Lama Justin, and I believe this is the 22nd session of Mahamudra for the People. Um, and yeah, I just want to thank everyone for showing up. Um, I believe the mic might be on for our tech persons.
Oh,
Yeah, great. Um, yeah, and so I just want to again thank everyone for being here, and I want to name that I'm kind of coming in from a very kind of rushed place. So I'm a little frazzled. um, I hope you're not. And so we'll start this off by taking a little bit of time for meditation. Hopefully, let's see. Um, we'll do this for about 12 minutes or so. And so if you can right now, rely on whatever shamatha technique you've been using. And I'm going to just go through these very briefly. So we can, one of the most important things is the placement of body. And so, well, traditionally in the text it says to take up the Vajrasana or lotus position. Um, what is most important is that we're seated comfortably, but also in a way that's alert. Allows for us to be alert. We don't want to be so comfortable that if we're tired, we kind of end up dozing off. Our back should be straight. Um, our chin down slightly, our gaze forward, our shoulders spread like the wings of a vulture. Our hands can be on our knees or meditation mudra. They say that the tongue should rest gently on the palate of the mouth. Should make sure that our jaw is not tight, right, and clenched. And so I want to make sure that our teeth aren't, clenched tightly. I want our body to be at ease and relaxed, and yet existing with a certain amount of intent. So, sometimes it's said when we sit to try and sit like a mountain, that kind of gravity. And then in the moment, we place our mind or anchor our mind through a variety of different means. And one of them is to focus on our breathing. So to focus on every inhalation and exhalation. And if it's helpful to count, you can count, one inhalation, one exhalation, one inhalation, one exhalation, two, one inhalation, one exhalation, three. Or you can just count, just remain aware of the inhalation and exhalation. The other technique is to use a object in your field of vision directly in front of you and to just very lightly anchor your attention, place your attention on the object. Use that as a way of focusing. And then, of course, if one wants to do this with a visualized object, you can do it with a visualized, perhaps a image of the Buddha on your head or directly in front of you. Or in some of the texts, a tigle or a kind of pea-sized kind of dot either on your brow or down at your navel. And I invite you to experiment with both of those techniques to see how they feel. Generally, the visualization of the tigle or the dot at the navel aids us when we kind of feel like our mind is kind of fluttery and moving all over the place. Maybe a little hard to pin down, maybe a little flighty. And then we can visualize, the tigle at our navel. And then in times when we're feeling kind of tired and full of sloth, then we can visualize the tigle right at the brow, and that kind of lifts our energy a bit. And then kind of one of the more abstract and subtle ways of anchoring the mind is just to remain completely aware of whatever is arising in the moment as far as thought activity goes. So that could be, cognition, the arising of thought, reaction to sensation, a leg falling asleep or something like that. And then, with this awareness of cognition, we try and really let go, right? We're not trying to change anything. We're not trying to chase anything. We're definitely not trying to modulate. And no matter which technique we use, whether it's awareness of breath or, using mind itself as the anchor, the one important thing to do is to not judge. It's not that one is necessarily better than the other. So we need to remove our addiction, our kind of obsession with hierarchies, categorizing things. And then it's very important to learn how to hold Tulopa's 6 nails in relationship to all of this. Right? So letting go of the past and our predilection with everything that's happened before this moment. So everything that's, my weird rushing and constant juggling of multiple things, right? To just let that go. That's all that stuff that I just did is not here right now. And then all the stuff I need to do in the future, just drop. I'm dropping that, letting that go. Letting go of this particular moment. What is this moment about? Right? Just drop that. Dropping the idea that we need to do anything in particular. Just let that go. And then, of course, dropping the need to analyze, right? To judge, to, again, come back with a sense of value as to, is this actually a good session or a bad session? Am I effective? Am I making progress? All of those kind of self-analytic, self-reflective things. We want to just see if we can drop that as well. Drop it and let it break. we don't need that right now. That actually tends to make our lives much more unpleasant. And then the last instruction is to rest. And so as we move into all of these different forms of shamatha, etc., no matter which one we do, the most important thing is resting. Learning how to just be in this moment in a way that's easy. There's no goal. We shouldn't be searching. We shouldn't be striving. We shouldn't be exerting ourselves. We should just relax. And much like in the kind of description of mind towards the end of the Cho sadhana, I don't know if all of you have read that, but this beautiful description of how to rest in the mind, experience of mind. And one of them is to leave the mind free and unmodulated, like a corpse lying in a charnel ground. Right? The reason why I like that is because if we just happen upon a corpse, on a charnel ground, that corpse is just there, right? It didn't place itself there. It didn't It's not worried about the positionality of it. It's not worried about if it's appropriate to be there or not. It's not worried about if it smells. It's not worried about, if it's attractive or if it's, making spiritual progress. It's just there. Just there. Like the air is there. Like our breath is here. Like the clouds are in the sky. Like the sun or moon. Or the bricks that make up our respective homes, or wood, whatever it is. These things are just there, and they're not involved, as far as we know, in constant conceptual elaboration, constant need to define and classify. They're just there. So let's say if we can just be here for about 12 minutes. Okay, so slowly bring yourself back to the group. So how's everyone doing right now? I want to see if anybody has any questions from last week or any time between last week and this week. How's your practice been? If there are any questions or things that you'd like to share, feel free to do that. I'll give you guys a little bit of time to up and down. Yeah. Up and down. You know, up and down is okay. In some of the texts, that I've been sharing and we've been unpacking together, there's a lot of discussion, or at least, these wonderful Mahasiddhas, kind of point out from time to time about the experience of blissfulness or the experiences of non-thought or other kind of, really exciting things. And sometimes those things come and sometimes they don't come. Sometimes we're focused or, Polly, as you mentioned, you're in the Seattle area and the forest fire smoke makes it hard for your body to settle. I mean, politics of the day make it hard to settle. Just nature of these times seem almost inherently unsettling, which on one level makes it a really great time to practice because it affords us plenty of beautiful ground to kind of come back just gently to our own kind of, way that we either react or experience, whatever it is that might be challenging. That doesn't have to be like a huge challenge, just on a day-to-day basis. One of the most important things about this practice, though, is to be really gentle and kind with ourselves when we find that, things are up or down, or we may even question, the practice itself. Like, this isn't going well, like what's going on? And there should never be any shame about the kinds of questions we ask or posit about all of this. The most important thing is trying to learn how to break out of this kind of space of constant conceptual analysis, right? And so if we find ourselves, quote unquote, screwing up, that's okay. The thing we do is, the most important thing is we recognize it. That's the beginning of the cultivation of awareness. And then we come right back to our practice. And if it's the case that things are just too, either our environment is too agitating or challenging, or maybe we're going through something with our body. It's very common. Lord knows, I like 3 days of the week, I get at maximum 4.5 hours of sleep. And if I can't get like a cat nap in later in the day, I'm like a zombie in the evening. And should I try and sit then, I fall asleep. Now, I can't I've learned not to beat myself up about that. And in those cases where either our body's tired, or maybe we're suffering from a health issue, or the circumstances around us are agitating, and part of our practice becomes learning how to take care of ourselves so that we don't fall back in, well, two things. I mean, A, so that we don't fall into this constant reactivity, like getting upset, or getting upset with ourselves for not being perfect or not being able to manifest everything, immediately. And then it's also this, I had, I think when I was upstate and teaching from here, from there, I was talking about, trying to imagine, the Buddha and the early Sangha begging for alms, and as Mahamudra practitioners to really, beg circumstances for whatever arises, and to be able to experience whatever arises as a gift. Even if it's a place where we kind of find ourselves coming back to our same kind of habits of reacting, or our same habits of not letting ourselves go into the practice. Because at some point, there's a text I was reading this morning that the gist of it was that, this process of awakening is inevitable. The mind wants to be able to recognize itself. We are naturally predisposed to awakening. And so part of our practice then becomes allowing that to happen. A, having faith and confidence in that it will happen. But then B, learning how to recognize that being easy with ourselves is part of good practice. Right? And so, those who work in the helping professions are familiar with self-care, and that is, really important. And so getting sleep, taking a cat nap, taking a bath, going for a walk, when we're feeling particularly edgy, to, know that we can get up and shift things around. So that's an important part of practice. And thank you for supporting one another with these techie things. So, before I get to the questions, now there's 6. So Anjana brought up this experience of lucid dreaming experiences. And so, as our experience of mind begins to settle, that can show up in different ways, right? So in one way, it can show up in our dreams, the dream state, through being able to be more aware of what's happening, more aware of the process of what's going on, awareness of our dreams. And then in the very broadly, a loosening of this kind of, reactivity that happens, right? So that even if we're stressed or tired or whatever, maybe we find ourselves being less reactive, more present, more able to just kind of go with things, which is a byproduct of being able to, the byproduct of the process of having observed our mind, right? And observed the qualities of our mind in the beginning of our practice, which tends to be a little chaotic, and then over time settling quite a bit. And so that kind of settles. So I'm going to start from the top here. So Aisha writes, For those of us who are new, would you mind briefly explaining the Mahamudra practice? Does it differ from a metta forgiveness or metta Buddha practice? Yes, yeah. So no, I'm more than happy to provide a brief explanation. So Mahamudra is a non-conceptual meditation. So it's non-conceptual in the sense that we're not engaging in the process or practice of visualizing anything necessarily. We're not relying on mantra recitation. We're just resting the mind in the in its experience of itself and in its experience of the moment. And so now Mahamudra itself is a combination of two practices that can be practiced distinctly, but then when they're woven together, that's how we get like what's called formal Mahamudra. So the first is a practice of shamatha, which is the practice of learning how to experience calm abiding or quiescence of mind. So allowing the mind to first get to know itself a little bit through just sitting. And we use various kinds of anchors or ways of settling the mind. And one is just keeping our awareness on our breathing, or placing our awareness on a visualized an actual object. We tend to do this practice with our eyes open. So you can just focus on a physical object, very gently allowing yourself to just settle that way. We're using a visualized object, so it could be a Buddha, you could visualize a ball of light if you like. Many different kinds of things you can do, or allowing yourself to just notice the thoughts that are arising as a way of anchoring the mind, and to just basically allow ourselves to get to know, and in a way you could say learn to become friends with our mind and everything that it does. And the first way we do that is to just sit and let what happens happen without trying to consciously engage the process. So the other practice is a form of vipassana or insight practice, which we kind of blend into the practice of shamatha in order to understand mind itself, to gain insight into the experience of mind itself. And then as these two come together, then the practice of Mahamudra arises. Now metta, is a practice of loving kindness. It could be considered a practice of gratitude to some extent, and forgiveness. And the metta Buddha is kind of a meditation practice that typically involves visualization of either metta Buddha, in front of oneself, helping to heal us. And then at different points and in different sadhanas, then visualizing ourselves as metta Buddha, able to heal others and purify negative karma as it arises in the form of illness. So hopefully that's helpful. So and as for how these practices relate, they all relate in the sense that they're all obviously geared at us being able to experience liberation. Mahamudra kind of penetrates all of them in the sense that learning how to be able to be in direct relationship with whatever arises, which is kind of like the key point of Mahamudra, is something that's very applicable to metta or to metta Buddha or to any other practice. So hopefully that was helpful. And yes, I want to echo Anjana and George and say welcome, Isha. And so Melissa asks, can you use thoughts themselves to perk you up since they have the nature of clarity like your mind? Yeah, so you definitely can. I think on one level, we need to be a little careful in the beginning when we are still kind of a little clingy with thoughts, because um, you know we can think of something absurd, right? And um, the most absurd thing, in a way, is our mind. Like, our mind is completely absurd in the sense that it is reactive. It conjures up things. In some texts they talk about mind. Our mind being like a magician, where it conjures up things that don't even necessarily exist in our lives, and we begin to react. Right? We begin to become upset, or we get jealous, or we get lonely because of thoughts. So if we can hold a relationship to whatever is happening as if it's almost like a joke, then everything can perk us up. Like, imagining a pink and purple polka dotted elephant. You know, what an amazing thing that we can imagine that, even though one of these doesn't exist. So anytime we can use the mind as a way of, like, kind of sharpening our senses or bringing us back into focus without us kind of chasing after everything, or letting particular thought activity arise that then leaves us feeling dull or agitated or irritated, then by all means, that's fine. um, and so Lauren asks, Lauren says, this may be redundant to all we've been into practice around this whole time, but I resonate with finding comfort in giving my grief and sadness to the mother or the guides. I don't know how to sit in silence with it without it feeling like I'm torturing myself. Um, that's good. Good, really good question. Um, so, I think the first thing that helps me with this is this kind of practice is like a practice in fullness. And if we can allow it to be a practice of fullness and joy, where we happen to just be silent because we're not verbalizing anything, then perhaps we can shift the nature, like our relationship to this container of a silent meditation without too much activity. I like the metaphor I was using before about trying to just take all of these things that we typically need to do, like classify, and as if they're like this very finely spun glass ball that's very fragile. Just drop it and let it shatter. We don't need to worry about the experience we're having. And of course, that's easier said than done. I'm not saying you're worrying, but we don't need to become conceptually oriented. And in the beginning, it's very hard because we tend to be conceptually oriented, right? When we move around our daily activities, right before we got here, I was responding to some timely kind of inquiry that was made, and so we function within relationship to time, we function in relationship to busyness, right? We're doing all this stuff, and then we have all of our emotional stuff that we're dealing with too. And the thing is that space can be the mother itself as well. And so allowing us to drop grief and drop sadness, drop anger, drop agitation, drop how terribly unsatisfying these times can be, and drop them into space. You know, like the mother. I mean, Mahamudra and a lot of tantric deities are basically equated with Mahamudra. So take like Vajrayogini. She's like a semi-wrathful form of the mother. In some sadhanas, she's described as the queen of space, or the very nature of Mahamudra. Right? These deities that exist, they exist visually in a somewhat anthropomorphic form, as a way of, in a compassionate way, as a way of allowing us to have direct relationship with them in a form way. But in and of themselves, whether it's Tara or Kali or Vajravarahi or Dhumavati or Vajrayogini or Troma or Medicine Buddha or Chinrezi, they all have the same nature, and that nature is pure space. That nature is basic experience of the moment, direct and free. Right? And so while it can be helpful to have a structure, so to speak, of visualized, kind of relationship to what, to the mother or to something else, by which we can lay these things at the feet. The mother is space, right? And so the mother is silence, but the mother is also sound, and the mother is form as well. And allowing ourselves to kind of rest into just letting go can be such a profoundly powerful experience, because we hold on so tightly, and usually to the it's strange, like we hold on so tightly to the things that make us suffer. And I think partially because that's how we know we exist sometimes, is that we are suffering. And when we begin to let go of those things that kind of keep us coming back with a formed identity, which is scary at first, we begin to become a lot more able to just kind of move in and out of whatever's happening, or through whatever's happening, with greater ease. So if you are, feeling like you want to kind of cultivate a Mahamudra practice, then I would suggest trying to understand the mother as also the experience of vivid space. And I mean, I can give you, I don't know if this is, I'll just say, I mean, there are some tantric descriptions of why the mother is like space, and one of the reasons is female, like the womb is basically space as well, right? And so if we can allow ourselves to just let go into space, we are letting go into the mother. Yeah, so young. I mean, I could give you guys an example. Like, I was, I don't know, maybe like 3 years ago in a situation, helping somebody I love and know well through a very difficult experience in their personal lives, and very painful for them. There was substance abuse involved. There was a little bit of self-harm involved. And I was one of the main caregivers for this person. And I'm often in very difficult situations, for my work. So, I'm used to being uncomfortable. I'm used to facing things that I just, know that I can't solve in the moment, um, and that it's not even really about that. Um, and yet, began to get very overwhelmed by this process of loss that I was going through in relationship to this person that was going through something very, 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 very intense and destructive. And luckily, I was able to have my work fly me out to a meditation retreat because it's kind of like a honing of the skills kind of thing. So to just have some time to practice and to practice some different kinds of forms of meditation. And when I got to this place, it was in Southern California. They flew me out there. They paid for the whole thing. And the first session of the retreat started. Every single complicated emotion related to what I'd been, helping this person through over the course of a couple of years just welled up. And I found myself completely unable to sit. I felt every single thing kind of just come at one time, and it was overwhelming. And, then I thought, remembered some of these other, meditation instructions we find where they're called like enhancement practices of if you're completely overwhelmed like that, get up and change the situation to so that it's more conducive to what you need in the moment. So um, this kind of topic of how to become resourced in relationship to our practice is very pertinent. And so, this was like a about 7-day, retreat in beautiful part of the Southern California in the desert. And so what I ended up doing was just practicing in my room, morning session, and then the rest of the day going out wandering around in the desert by myself. And that was exactly what I needed. I needed time out in kind of this wilderness solitude kind of environment. And that amount of space, I think, is what I needed to help me process all of the pain that I was feeling, right? All of the overwhelming intensity of the powerlessness I was feeling in relationship to trying to help this person that I care quite a bit for. And so, I bring this up because looking at how we relate to what is arising and what it is that we need, in reality, is something that's worth exploring, right? So in that moment, I was laying everything at the feet of the mother through being out in spacious nature, right? Once I walked over, the first ridge, I was there was just like, miles and miles and miles of cactus and rocks and rattlesnakes and all sorts of stuff. And I would wander, find a place to sit, and then sit there. And then get up and wander, find another place to sit and sit. Right? But what I couldn't do was be in a big hall full of people because I was in pain in that moment and I needed to be alone. So this process of like these enhancement practices of learning how to be able to listen deeply to what it is that we need and to let go of some of these ways that we've been programmed, sometimes even by capitalism, where we feel like, I need to work through this through meditation. And while it's true that meditation can offer a benefit for us when we're going through, intense pain, or grief, or sadness, or anger. It's usually not the kind of thing that we can consciously sit down and know, well, my sadness is of a determined mass, so I need to meditate an equal amount to kind of deal with that. And sometimes we need to just open up to the fact that a lot of this is a process that we can only know a certain amount about. We can't know everything about. And we are living in, we've arisen within a culture, live within a culture, and then constantly are reinforced by a culture that asks us to know everything about everything. And if you don't know everything about everything, like, there's something wrong with you. But with our emotional health, and when I say emotional health, it becomes spiritual health, because it's so tied into the degree to which we can love ourselves, the degree to which we can allow ourselves to have a relationship to space. Space is terrifying, especially when we're habituated to kind of having all of the difficulties, even if they're difficulties we really can't stand and don't want to have be in our lives. Those things help reify us. They help keep us seemingly there. Spaciousness is scary, because when we walk into it or step into it, we're then also faced with this, the possibility of the fact that most of everything that we know is not really the way it is. And that is intense. Sometimes we're prepared for it, and sometimes we're not. And sometimes we can kind of bite off and digest a little bit of that. Sometimes too much of that is just overwhelming. So if we are able to care for ourselves and engage in these enhancement practices that exist as a way of kind of finely tuning our experience, finely tuning our practice, finely tuning our relationship to some of these much more abstract and kind of viscerally powerful aspects of the nature of mind and the nature of phenomena around us, which we begin to get some clarity on through meditation. If we don't learn how to kind of focus and adjust and titrate and all of that, then sometimes we can be overwhelmed, or we can become paralyzed, or we just shut down. So and actually the funny thing is, I left that retreat early because I was like, man, like, I had to drive. I flew in and out of LA, and I was like, oh man, like, I've been in the desert, and I've been kind of communing with the desert. Now I want to commune with the mountains on my way back up to LA. So in order for me to do that, I got to leave a little early. So I just took off, and I had all my meditation stuff with me, and I drove through the mountains and stopped in various places, and that also was the right thing to do. So sometimes we have to say, fuck it a little bit and change up the way we do things. Especially because, like, the other thing I've learned is, and this is something that I don't struggle with now, but I really did for a long time, was letting go of what it means to be a good practitioner, like a good meditator, somebody who's like doing the right thing, doing it the right way. And yeah, I really kind of like went at myself to really like look at it, like, why is it that I do that? What is it in my the family I came from and that experience, my relationship to power, yeah, absolutely, Isha. Yeah, right versus skillful. like correct versus authentic. That once we begin to kind of shed some of that need to be a good meditator or a good practitioner, we can be ourselves, who also happens to be a practitioner and a meditator. And then we begin to kind of cut right into everything in the right way, right for us, authentic for us. And that sometimes involves us saying, fuck it, to some extent. Like, I understand the path, I see which way it's going, but given myself and my makeup and like, what's easy, what's hard, where I really sabotage myself, I'm gonna take this small kind of turn over here, and I'll get to it that way. So hopefully that's a little helpful. So Wambui writes, I feel a dynamic tension between my need for ease during these hard times and the offering/invitation and meditation to rest in whatever arises. Any thoughts? Yeah, so I got a perfect thought is, what's the difference between ease and resting in whatever arises? I used to have a bunch of bamboo plants, and then we moved, and now I don't. But I love bamboo, and the thing I love about it is a ton of things. Like the sound of the wind going through it is amazing. How it comes up in clumps. But I mean, the amazing thing is just how it bends, right? And that ability to bend is not an ability. It's not, the bending of bamboo isn't an act of submission. It's an act of grace. It's an expression of grace. Right? And so what I'm curious about is whether or not your meditation practice can be an expression of grace. And grace has the ability to hold these two things, which in this moment for you may feel like different things. Ease in crazy times, absolutely crazy times. Ease and resting in whatever arises. If spaciousness and the nature of mind, our very essence, like the very essence of our mind, if that is the mother, then where is the difference between experiencing ease and caring for ourselves? The same way we could say we are taking care of the mother. In some texts in the tantric tradition, they talk about all of the energy channels in the body. Like there's one central channel, and the channel on the left, and the channel on the right, and these places where they cross, and that's where these chakras are, right? The throat, the brow, sometimes the crown, depending on the system, the heart, the navel, and below. And there are deities, it's believed, that live, in all of these chakras, right? And each system is a little different in terms of where they live, how many there are, and all of that. But in the tradition itself, it's believed that because they're there, our body is full of deities. And if our body is full of deities, then we need to care for our body. Right? That becomes important. Because our body itself is deity-like, right? Buddha-like, Bodhisattva-like, right? Our body is the seat of power. Our body is the way through which our expression of Buddha activity arises. So we go from, we eventually get to this place of understanding that activity, whether it be physical or verbal or mental, is the artistic expression of enlightenment. Our body is something to be cared for because it's a vehicle. Right? It's a powerhouse. And our mind is exactly the same. Our mind is a vast, clear, vivid expression of the deity, of the mother, of perfection. And so if that's the case, all of that which arises within the experience of mind should not be regarded as anything other than the play of the mother. Even the most messed up thoughts. And, look at, today. The president of the United States has coronavirus, tested positive for it, and so did his wife, First Lady. And all sorts of thoughts, are arising in people's minds right now. The stock, like I was checking the news apps early, 4 a.m, and like the stock markets were tanking in Tokyo, and everybody's freaking out. Some people are like, oh, well, maybe he'll die. Some people are saying, well, maybe, it serves him right, people are saying gracious things. They're saying things that are less than gracious. It's not a question of whether or not anything's justified or not. It's just activity, thought activity that's happening. Can we learn to experience ease in relationship to the thought activity that arises? Because it's all very similar in nature. Thought activity, the nature of our reactions are no different than the mother. So I'm throwing it right back at you. But hopefully that's helpful. So Edwin writes, I have difficulties in transforming jealousy and envy. Most of it evolves into patterns of regret and blame. I end up turning towards self-doubts and working with how success defines me. I was going to post something on Facebook. I did actually, and then I took it down because I'm just not feeling very comfortable on Facebook these days. But it was a really nice reflection on some of the ways that we internalize capitalism. And one of them was that first is that we feel guilty for just resting or not doing anything. Right? Like take a day off and not do anything. And somehow, we'll find ourselves weirdly enough like feeling guilty that I haven't done anything, I haven't been productive. When we begin to understand that our thoughts, right, the reactions that arise in the mind are not us, we can let go of reactions like regret or blame or over self-identification with what is happening. I don't know if it's necessarily because we have kind of come up in a Abrahamic culture that is highly aligned to this Abrahamic view of justice and morality. But it is very easy to over-identify the thoughts that are arising in our mind with our sense of worth or value, right? Or how success defines you. And this is where, like, Mahamudra becomes very radical. It cuts that. It like slices that right away. We need to stick with practice a little bit for us to be able to experience that. But once we begin to experience that the thought activity that arises is not me, we allow ourselves to get a little free, a little liberated from the thought activity that's happening. And a lot of the thought activity that's happening too is kind of just almost like the tangential ripples a lot of other stuff that's happening. Right? And so, I mean, you've identified this as a pattern, right? And so that's great. My question for you is, what happens if you start to, like the pattern, imagine it's like a thin layer of gossamer placed over, a crystal ball. It's like perfectly clear. Like if you could just pull that gossamer away, or just start pulling the threads and letting the whole thing unravel, so that you can just behold the crystal clear, true nature of your mind. That's what the practice becomes. And this issue of transformation is interesting too. And, I probably sound like a broken record about this, but it's in modern tantric Buddhism, and I brought it up here. I bring it up everywhere. Transformation can be very helpful as a way of addressing some of our, the places where we get stuck with our emotional reactivity. So kind of transforming one for the other. So, when we're feeling intense anger, to, for example, meditate on ourselves as the bodhisattva of compassion, Chinrezi. And then we can also, recite Chinrezi's mantra, right, and learn how to kind of replace that anger with love and compassion, right? And that's good. And it's also a little artificial, right? So the practice of Mahamudra is really about letting it just play itself out. Jealousy, envy. Play it out. Let it just let the thought activity go and go. Don't chase it. But like a loud a loud dog, or even a young child, who's just like in a bad mood and irritable. Assuming it's not something that's, related to hunger or pain. Most kids will cry for however long they do, and then begin to self-soothe, self-settle. And to some extent, our mind does that as well. And maybe not in the course of 15 minutes, maybe for some of us, but over the course of some time practicing, we're able to notice changes. But a lot of it has to do with, so even the act of transformation, it's interesting because there's still a value judgment in transformation. Like active transformation. The act of transforming one thing into another is usually rooted in wanting to replace one thing with lesser value or something of increased value or increased importance. Right? So while transforming is good, there's such incredible power in learning how to just let things go into space. To let regret and blame, like those two little light, freshly blown glass balls, drop and shatter. And so the jealousy and envy can be directly experienced. And so that you can begin to understand the spaciousness inside of jealousy and the freedom that's no different than the experience of envy. But sometimes these things we don't like to engage because we think there's something wrong with them. Like I'll share like my own weird like greediness. Or a friend who's a statue maker in Nepal, and we're in touch quite a bit. And over the summer or spring, really, when COVID began to hit the Indian subcontinent, he was telling me about just how terrible things were in Kathmandu Valley, and I was feeling all like, I don't know, overwhelmed with stuff. So I was like, all right, like your family's having a hard time with money. I want to buy a couple statues, and let's just like, will you make these ones custom for me? And get involved in the whole process, and some of them will be ready soon. And sometimes to soothe myself, I'm just sharing all my secrets today. I will pull up the pictures of them that his family are making. And even though it's a completely material object and, all this stuff, I'm just like, like this helps. This helps me. And is there an element of greed to it? Someone out, other than myself might look at me and be like, man, what does that guy like need those things for? Like, and, they're supports, reminders of Dharma, reminders of the importance of practice. But, the inside of jealousy, like what is inside of jealousy? What is inside of envy? Envy and jealousy have so much energy. Like, how, like with wheat, there's like the wheat germ. Like, what is the germ of jealousy? What's that, like a small nuclear reactive core? All of that energy. Jealousy makes us go. Jealousy makes us move. Jealousy motivates us. And envy does as well. Right? Envy is like active. We feel it in our body. Right? So maybe developing a relationship to that intense energy is part of it for you. Anyway, there are 3 more questions, and we've got about 14 minutes. Yeah. They are meritorious objects. Okay, and so Anjana writes, Lama, I'm feeling a lot, like a lot of my process is happening in an other place, maybe Chanagram-like or smoky, hazy place. At first I thought I was sleeping, but I don't think I'm asleep. It's just a place of no words, and I don't really have super clear memories of it, but I know I'm healing. But I know healing, and as for and has happened, even if I don't know exactly what. I guess I'm wondering if there's some ways to be more aware in this liminal space. Yeah, so so I'm assuming this is rooted in this kind of like lucid dreaming experience. It's okay. So, Anjan, is this in like the dreaming space or yes? Okay, great. Okay, so with this, so first thing is how we go to sleep is really important. So what I would do is begin to make the aspiration that as you're going to sleep. So there are a couple ways about doing this. The first is you can bring deity practice into your sleep by literally practicing as you're settling yourself, and as you find yourself falling asleep, right? Sometimes we're so tired that we just kind of like knock right out, and we're not able to feel all of the levels of kind of how things settle, right? If we can bring either deity practice or Mahamudra, just resting clearly in the moment, allowing everything to settle. And as we're doing that, we form the aspiration to not only remember our dreams, but to be able to be awake in them. This is how we begin to train ourselves into being able to be more available to what's arising. So this consciously setting the intention to not only remember the dream state, but to be able to recognize it as it's occurring. And then slowly over time, we can practice in different kind of aspects, and this would be a little bit more for later, but directly engaging what's happening in the dream state so that we can have not only Dharma practice, but to be able to, because we're not limited to physical space and the body, and being, in the UK, for example, that we can travel to different Buddha worlds and receive teachings directly from different Buddhas, right? From different teachers who have passed away, teachers of various traditions. They're all still available, but learning how to kind of blur the line between waking experience and dreaming experience is the essential piece. And I also feel like Chittapati is a good, powerful presence for that as well. So hopefully that's helpful. I want to try and get in these two other questions. So Su Young writes, how does Mahamudra relate to enlightenment or awakening as a permanent state of being? So as, oh, okay, in meditation. So in meditation, then remaining so the one thing to just be a little careful about, Anjana, is like falling into a place of, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but dullness where we end up kind of like time can fly by and we don't even know what we're doing or what's happening. So if in that place you can just slightly adjust your lens, so to speak, that can be helpful. So it's basically like we want to be able to fuse awareness with that experience, if that makes sense. And so Su Young, so how does Mahamudra relate to enlightenment or awakening as a permanent state of being? So Mahamudra is the practice of learning how to become awakened. Now, like full Buddhahood, it said, is this experience of being able to spend all of our time totally awake, right? Liberated, free, and able to understand not only the nature of our mind, but then to get free in relationship to all of the conceptual elaborations, all of the patterning, all of the like discursive reactivity that we're constantly engaged in. And so the practice of Mahamudra is this practice of, it's like the on-ramp to that experience, right? So in the beginning, we need to first sit with mind, and it's kind of like a hot mess of just like chaos at first, so much so that a lot of people get really frustrated with their practice and give it up, kind of early on. Others will then keep going, and they'll notice changes in their practice, right? But they'll still kind of have their eye on a destination. And I need to get to this experience, or I need to have these experiences, and that can kind of get in the way. In the practice itself, we try and drop everything. To look with 6 nails is, I love it because the instruction is so simple, and yet it is so profound. Like, what does it mean to really let go of the past? To let it go fully. To let go of all of the ways that we hold on to the ways that we've been harmed. To let go of all the ways that we hold on to all the great things we've done. All the joys. And everything in between. Just let go. It's done, right? It's kind of like, a painting that's done. Like, what are you going to do? Like, my dad's a painter, and I grew up in Soho, and when I was a kid, he had the director of the Guggenheim come to check his studio out. And I'll never forget, my mom took me to go see Tootsie. And it turns out what happened while we were watching the movie was the director of the museum told my dad, like, this painting over here is great. If you could do a series of these, we'll give you a show. And my dad told them, I've already completed that painting and I'm done. Like, I'm not going back to that. Like, that's done. And basically turned down, that opportunity. And letting go of the past is like that. It's like, it's done. Right? That's a really hard thing to do. And when we sit down and we really kind of take stock of how attached we are to the past. The same thing with the future, like, especially in America, where, like, we're so goal driven. So what does it mean to just drop all those goals, including enlightenment, liberation, freedom? Just drop it. And then to drop any ideas of what the present moment should be. And then to drop the need to do anything. The need to analyze, the need to classify, the need to, engage in value judgments. Drop. And to just rest freely. And to begin to train in what resting freely like that means. How it arises. How it changes us. So Mahamudra is the direct path right to awakening as a much more permanent state of being. We'll have flashes and glimpses along the way, and those are incredible. And they're very important because it's kind of like, driving to some destination, and maybe you're using like a map app on your phone, and all of a sudden there's no service, right? And you're like, oh shoot, like, I haven't memorized the whole path, but shit, I'm on this road, man. I'm just gonna go on this road until I get some service. And then you get some service, and that's an awakening. Like, that's one of these kind of awakening experiences where we have a direct glimpse or experience of the nature of mind. And then you could see kind of the whole nature of what the path is, right? And then okay, I know that at the next turn I need to make a right, and then you lose service for a bit. When you get to the turn, you make the right, and then you get service again. And eventually these kind of moments become more easy to experience on will, and then just more blended into the nature of our being. Hopefully that's helpful. Let me know if it's not. And then Kyle writes, is there an appropriate time not to practice? I've recently been experiencing some upheaval triggered by a sudden return of my father to my life. Really threw me off, and I found it hard to bring myself to sit. The guilt I feel in not practicing becomes a barrier to getting me back to consistently practicing as well. I'm trying to be gentle with myself and have faith in my connection to the Dharma. The teachings and the authentic teachers is enough to bring me through this, but I can't help wonder if I'm just rationalizing why it's okay to not be practicing while these demons influence my mind and turn me away from giving my energy to resting my mind. When do I tell myself to suck it up and just do it? Yes. So my first question is why does practice always mean sitting? Why does practice always mean formal Buddhist practice? What I like to tell correction officers when I teach them meditation is the most beautiful thing about meditation and the mind is that it's free, right? You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to talk to a statue maker in Nepal. And then the other thing is that our mind is constantly going, even when we're unconscious. So we have it sounds to me, Kyle, as if you are going through what some meditators might call a particularly rich period. All of these ideas of well, first of all, there's the intensity of your relationship with your father and him coming back into the picture, and what that does for you, to you, how you react to that, all of the emotion that's there. That is rich. Actually, I'm going to grab something real quick to read. And then this whole idea of sit on the cushion or go for a walk and be what the fuck, man? Why is this guy back in my life? And man, now I'm all pissed off. Okay, perfect. Where is mind when you're pissed off? Where is mind when you're doubting the whole thing? About doubting the whole thing is a story. I mean, there are a bunch of stories about this, probably because there are a lot of people who have doubted, even though we're taught not to doubt. One experience is there's a kind of a longer biography of it's not that long, but a little bit longer biography of Varupa than some of the ones we see, where he's doing practice and then he becomes really frustrated and depressed that he's been practicing his sadhana for at least 12 years and nothing's happened, and he's what the fuck, here I am, nothing's happened, and he picks up his mala and he throws it in the latrine, and all of a sudden Vajrahi appears, and she's what's up with you, man? I've been here the whole time, and you were this close to enlightenment, and you just went and pissed it off, and he had but the thing is that he had this experience, of the deity directly in front of him, which kind of helped push him over the edge. And this kind of realization of the fact that we need to have a relationship to spiritual practice that is non-binary. And the non-binary part is learning how to not prefer one over the other. Like I've this whole process of like learning who we are is complicated and messy. And we all have to figure ourselves out. And religion and spirituality can be really complicated. Again, because on some level we want to be really good. And then we are who we are. And I have, on a personal level, struggled with all sorts of things like religious diets, right? Or where it's like you should eat this or you shouldn't eat that. And so I feel my most authentic, and like authentic in the sense of internally manifesting who, like my essence, my core, by just navigating some of these things as if it's instinctual, right? So like sometimes I'll be vegetarian, sometimes I won't. Sometimes I won't drink alcohol, sometimes I will. But I always get all messed up when it's like, this is the one thing. I part of it is, like I'm rebellious perhaps, but I've learned to find meaning and a sense of authenticity and learn that it's okay to have a relationship to some of these things instinctually, right? The other thing is that part of our practice always should be off the cushion. Because, let's be honest, like we're not Milarepa, so most of the time we spend is off the cushion anyway. Right? So when somebody comes up to you and pisses you off, right, that becomes a treasury of bliss. When we become full of doubt, that becomes a treasury of bliss. That becomes a precious opportunity to be able to examine the nature of mind, or to rest in the nature of mind. To be able to look at, from where did these thoughts arise? To just observe mind as it happens, even while we're feeling visceral anger or frustration, sadness or loss. That's what we have to work with. Those demons, once you feed them, they become your friends. That's what Chill is all about. And so, like, once we begin to understand that all of the things that are sharp and hard and jagged, that we initially perceive are sharp and hard and jagged about ourselves, are actually wisdoms, but we can't see it. And we're so wrapped up in how they look. Oh man, that's like fucked up. Like, why should I even have that? I shouldn't cultivate that. I shouldn't have a relationship with that. I should exercise that. I should get that out of here. Right? And that's binary. What does it mean to just blend all of this experience with space? And then experience what that's like. And then sit and drop. Sit for 4 minutes, 3 minutes. Where does the anger come from? Where does the frustration arise? Is there any space between these thought occurrences? If I visualize myself as a deity, do these things arise the same way? Is thought activity not the expression of the deity? It's just taking the time to get radical in the sense of, interrogating what's really happening. Because if we get too binary, we will make everything becomes then an impediment to practice. I know that you're I believe, right, you're engaged, right? When when I found out I was going to be a dad, I was in Bodh Gaya, and so I have an older son who's he's going to be 21 this month, and I was in Bodh Gaya, and I was doing Kora with a friend, circumambulating the stupa, where the Buddha was enlightened. And he turned to me and he was like, wow, you're going to be a dad. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, you really had a good shot at getting enlightened. And man, I was so, man, that's messed up. Everything is an opportunity for practice. And when we look at things as impediments, whether or not it be difficult relationships, and I can tell you, where I work is just such an intense, challenging place. It still is, after all these years, and after all of my own kind of personal victories there, being around that level of intensity humbles me every single day I show up. And it's a powerful place for me to practice into the experience of anxiety, or the experience of fear, or the experience of existential pain, right? And to make a home in these, that's where the yogin or the yogini lives. We don't need this fancy dharma clothes that monastics have. It's all nice and it looks great, but we need the cloth cut of fucked up emotion, and make your shirt out of anger, and your pants out of rage, and your socks out of jealousy. And you should bind your hair up, into a top knot of dejection, and all of that is what you should walk into. That is what's there. We don't need, the nice, statues from Nepal. We don't need that. They make me feel good though. The difficult emotions. That's where home is. And that's where my home is. That's where my practice is in these places that are terrible. On Rikers Island, or on, Hart Island with, the Potter's Field, or in hospice, right? With people who are sick and dying, and grieving family, and supporting nurses and social workers who become very close to people who then die constantly for years and years and years. Their whole careers are built on that. And everything that comes, it's a little bit and I know, Kyle, you live in Long Island. It's like going to the ocean. Beautiful oceans in Long Island. And the thing I love about going to the ocean is the weird thought that this process of waves hitting the sand, has gone on before I was born. It will go on after I die. And it goes on and on and on and on. That's part of its nature. And this mind, which isn't located only here, goes on and on and on and on. And sometimes it goes on with images that are paralyzing and intense, challenge us as practitioners. And those are the times we should just sit and blend space with what's happening. That's what Mahamudra is about. It's about learning how to understand that the container for everything that arises, it's not just big, it's endless. The container can hold everything. And so if there's a way to just let that confidence in the container to arise and to experiment with it, then you're going to find a lot of really powerful, meat. Some of you eat meat or tofu or tempeh or, whatever, in the experience. And I'll just close with this one that, thing. And again, I alluded to this in modern tantric Buddhism, but there was a point when, for a number of years, I would go out to Asia, and especially this is when Bokra Rinpoche was alive, and I would, live in a house next to the monastery and do practice, kind of extended practice, and then get instruction, go back to the States, be back here for X period of time, practice, and go back to check in with him. And I was telling him, about some of my practice and taking it off the cushion, and just saying look, I've been taking it on the subway. I've been doing this. I've been going to the cemetery. I've been doing all this stuff. And he was like, good. That is very good. That's very important. And he said, it's really easy to go into retreat. And you go into retreat and everything is good. They bring you food, you have your, everything is taken care of. Right? And yes, you have to deal with your mind. And that's what you do. That's when your mind can get loud. And that's when you learn about your mind. Right? And at the same time, it's a very controlled environment. Right? You don't have someone coughing on you in the age of COVID. You don't have someone walking into a subway car half naked, drunk, and saying they're going to urinate on the floor. You don't have that in retreat. And he was saying it's easy to be in retreat for an extended period of time when the conditions are optimal, and then come out and then find yourself in conditions that are not optimal and completely lose your shit. Completely lose your ability to recognize, the mind's essential nature when something challenging is happening. And so there's an argument to be made about training in these intense places. Because if you can train in an environment of violence, or an environment of mass death, or an environment of death, or an environment of illness, or bereavement, or anxiety, right? Then you're well trained, you're well equipped, And yeah, we're gonna mess up all sorts of times. Get upset, feel the need to vent, but this is what we need from time to time. So anyway, I wish you all the best, And this was fun. I enjoyed the session. And I thank you all so much for your practice and so much for your incredible questions. And, I think the thing that keeps me going is knowing that you guys are going and doing such a great job. I really, I'm really moved. So thank you. Thank you. And I dedicate any merit from this session to liberation of all beings from our reactivity, all the places where we get stuck, all places where we forget to care about ourselves and others. And I dedicate this to the ability to recognize our own experience of mind as the mother. I pray that you all can do that. Take good care.